Good afternoon. I'm David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Editor for the Tennessean. And on behalf of the Tennessean Editorial Board, we're hosting interviews with leading mayoral candidates and also candidates for at-large Metro Council. We're so pleased to have Gicola Lane here with us, who's running for at-large, one of the at-large seats. Voters will have a chance to select up to 5 people for those seats. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, tell us, why are you running for this office?
Well, I decided to run largely because I became frustrated with what I saw from our city's leadership. A lot of people know me from being the lead campaign coordinator on the Community Oversight Board referendum last year. And during that process, as you know, it started in Metro Council as legislation before we actually took it to the streets and got all the signatures to make it an actual charter referendum. And during that process, as many people know, we have a 40-body Metro Council, only 5 people voted for it. And I just saw how we lacked a lot of bold, principled leaders during that process, because after it got on the ballot and people saw that, a lot of people supported it, then people started to come out in support of it. And I thought that was just reflective of us not being people-centered in our leadership. And so I decided to run to actually be people-centered in my leadership and let the people, the experts of the community, really decide, the way forward. I think if we are leading correctly, we should be leading with community first. And so I bring bold, principled leadership to the table. And I think what we got done with building grassroots coalitions all across Nashville, all different racials, backgrounds, all different ages, I can hope to do strategically on council. And I think it's needed. And so that's why I decided to run.
Well, thank you. We're very pleased to have Executive Editor Maria DeVarine here as well.
Hello.
And let me follow up with this. This was not an easy path, the community oversight. You faced a lot of resistance, a lot of barriers. How were you able to get through that, and what were some of the things you needed to do? Because you won by a tremendous majority,
right, but
it was not an easy path getting there.
Right. Well, I pretty much, I feel like, have kind of faced it all my life, and I think that's why I would be a good council member. Just to give you some background, I'm a first-generation college student. I grew up going to Stratford High School in East Nashville. It was on the state's priority school list when I was attending, and only 35% of East Nashville high schoolers were actually going to college back then. I graduated in 2007. Obviously, I'm the youngest person running as well. And so I've seen what it looks like to be, underfunded, not understand what FAFSA is, not have the background to know how to, matriculate through college and, figure out these resources. But I made it. And the first year I went to college, I actually earned a 4.0. I went down to Atlanta, Clark Atlanta University, so I'm used to adversity. And so I used that same grit and same fortitude in the Community Oversight Board, and so did so many people. It was a collective effort. And so we knew that this was something that the people wanted. This wasn't just our idea that came out of a hat. This was something that you actually pointed out that has been an over 40-year fight here in Nashville. And so we were, definitely, striving and on the backs of so many people and shoulders that was lifting us up through this whole effort. But of course it was very frustrating, but community is what got us through. And I think that the more we can involve community and bring community perspectives on the council, the better off we will be.
Thank you.
When you're out in the community talking to people about what changes they'd like to see in Nashville or what they'd like to continue, what are you hearing from residents that would be their top 2 or 3 items they want you to work on?
Sure. Well, infrastructure is definitely one of the issues, and of course our school system. And as a product of our school system, of course I know how vital that is. So I definitely want to see the schools get fully funded. I will be a fierce advocate to make sure that happens and that we get some, recurring revenue happening there. I also have mentees who are in Metro schools, and so I know what it's like to go to a school and you don't have a math teacher for an entire year. And so those are some of the things that I'm hearing. A lot of people are frustrated that they've never had, sidewalks in their neighborhoods, and you go downtown and the infrastructure is totally different. And I share that same sentiment as well, because the street I grew up on, walking to the bus every morning, didn't have a sidewalk. My grandmother rides Excess Ride, and it still doesn't have a sidewalk now. And so I want to make sure that we actually have real equity, and I think we can start building equity by, electing equitable leaders and people who are really going to have that as a leading priority.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Since you've mentioned equity, Mayor Briley, in his State of Metro address, had said that he'd like to see Nashville become the #1 city for equity.
Mhm.
How do we get there, and why don't you think we're here yet? What are the obstacles to that?
I think how we get there is actually, again, leading with the community first. Community members are the experts on their communities. Workers are the experts on the workplace. Educators and students are the experts on our public schools. And I think too often those voices have been ignored. And I think it needs to move to the forefront in that we need to govern in a participatory way. And I think that just has not happened. And I think we need to bring more people to the table, just the way that, we were involved with drafting and talking with our city councilors about community oversight is exactly what we need to do across the board in any type of legislation that we're doing. And I think a lot of times I've heard on the council that, people don't understand over and over and over, and people do understand, and they want to be, included in the process, and I think that's the way that we can do it. And we haven't been doing it in the past, and I think that's the #1 issue. We just have to bring more people to the table. And like I said, if we want just and equitable leaders, we have to look at people's track records of justice and of equity, and I think that's how we can really get there.
This is a quick follow-up. At the State of Black Nashville Forum, there was a question about the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding at this moment is a wall where Metro has not been equitable to, especially to people of color here. What needs to be done to change it, to break that wall, essentially?
Intentionality. I think if we are intentional about making sure that people of color are included in government, in our agencies, that we are funding and spreading out funding throughout schools, throughout neighborhood infrastructure, we'll actually see some of those changes happening. And we'll see, TSU students and FISC students and American Baptist College students and Meharry students want to stay here in Nashville. I graduated from a historically black university, and I actually went to Atlanta for school. And one of the reasons I went to Atlanta is I didn't see black people doing well in Nashville. And when I went to Atlanta on a college tour, I was floored at how well black people were doing in Atlanta. And immediately after school, I wanted to come back and really do the work. I actually learned about Clark Atlanta from a college tour that I took. As many people know, I used to work at Martha O'Brien Center. I actually went to Martha O'Brien as well when I was a student, and TSU students were my summer camp counselors, and they were who taught me about this culture of historically black universities. And I think, we really need to capitalize on that amazing talent that we're missing out on to other major cities.
Thank you.
You touched on transportation a little when you were talking about your grandmother, and I know in 2018 we did not pass a referendum to focus on transit and transportation. Can you tell us what you would do, especially for the outlying areas that are in need of maybe more bus service or more options for transportation?
Sure. So one thing that I've learned as an organizer is the most important thing we need to do is listen. And I think we don't have enough people listening to the people and the people who are affected by transportation barriers in Nashville. And so that's the first thing I think we need to do is listen. And if we were listening, we heard loud and clear that people did not think that that transit plan was the best for our city. And so what we have to do is when we're, actually forming these plans, not do fake community engagement, do real in-depth community engagement to really get our community's buy-in. And I think that's the place that we have to really start, is bringing, again, communities to the table, drafting these things really in collective collaboration. And that's how we can really move the city forward in transportation in all of the other areas that, should be priorities for our city.
Now, there's been a lot of questions revolving around whether Nashville's on the right path right now and the growth is on the right path. What is your opinion about that?
I think Nashville needs balance. I think we are not balanced in what we do. I think, a lot of people have, been as frustrated as I've said I've been frustrated. And the reason I decided to run for city council, from, the schools and, you see the teachers and the stick outs that's happening, to workers, passing away on the jobs, to homeless camps continuing to be, displaced. And of course, we know displacement is a major issue, particularly for seniors and for African Americans and young professionals. And so I think that when we focus on the people who are on the bottom of the social and economic totem pole, we improve all of our quality of lives. And I think we've been complete opposite. We've kind of been focused on the businesses, not so much on, the outlying parts of the county, not so much on, people who may not earn the highest incomes or work the fanciest of jobs. And I think when we do that, everyone's life improves.
So the schools, you've talked about your own experience going through Nashville public schools, and some people think that the mayor and the council should be more involved in either running the day-to-day, more oversight over selections of the district chief or school board members. Tell us a little bit about your viewpoint.
Well, I think as a council, what we need to focus on is fully funding. I don't think we should get too caught up in trying to micromanage the school board members. I think that we should play our part, and I think we have not played our part as a Metro Council, as a mayor in the past, to make sure that we're putting up budgets that are equitable and that fully fund schools that we know are majority Black and brown. And I think that is an issue, and I think our city has, admitted that is an issue, and I think that's what we need to focus on more so than chastising the school board, because we can be chastising ourselves as well for not fully funding them to give them, ability. Now, I do think, there have been some matters at the school board level that, we want to make sure any department has oversight and has some actual standards and regulations about the way that they're spending the money that is allocated. But I don't think we need to dabble in their business. I think we need to focus on funding them as our first priority.
You mentioned in your questionnaire one of your qualifications is your financial background. Recently, there were these budget votes in the council. By one vote, the virtual budget failed. How did you view the budget process this year, knowing that the budget that was adopted, the mayor's budget, is balanced on a parking proposal that hasn't yet been approved?
Yeah, I was disappointed that we were using that parking proposal again as we were, thinking about selling Williams and Edmondson site last year as a tool to, bridge the gap. And I just don't think that is the wisest decision to make. I think we need to get away from, these kind of one-off sales of property or parking or whatever, may come down the pike, and really focus on recurring revenue. And that's one reason why this year I did support the tax increase or adjustment for the Virtue Mendez budget. I think when we see that buses are going to be cut, we have to say, whoa, what are we doing? And I think that just didn't have enough independence to really push through what was important for not only our workers but our students and our public transportation users in our city. And I think again, if we're really focused on community, we can start improving some of these things so we don't have to do these parking and park sales.
You mentioned the tax increase. Can you share with us a little more detail about why you supported that and what you think needs to be done in the future to try to balance that budget and pay down our debt? Sure.
Well, one of the main reasons I support it is obviously because it fully funded schools. And I was also worried about the bus cuts. I think that is extremely backwards. And we should not be doing that at this phase that we are in Nashville. If you look at our ridership and who mostly uses the bus, I think it is unequitable to cut any bus transportation services at this point of where we are in Nashville. I also know that there was funding for Gideon's Army in that budget. Gideon's Army is a grassroots group that's working on anti-violence, and there has been a lot of issues with youth violence. And if we really say these are issues that we care about and we're not willing to take the steps to fund and invest in them and actually provide some prevention, I think that's something that's out of balance, and we have to get in balance.
one of the issues that you mentioned, displacement, that is huge in Nashville, is affordable housing. Could you talk a little bit about your views about the mayor's under one roof proposal and how you would like to see affordable housing addressed?
Sure. Well, the under one roof proposal, I share many concerns that a lot of people have, as it seems, a large chunk is going to MDHA. And I know there has been, and you all have covered a lot of the transparency issues with MDHA, and I share that same concern. As someone who used to work at a nonprofit that sits right in the middle of one of the largest MDHA properties, I know that there are some issues there. I was actually over in Andrew Jackson helping with the disaster relief after the electricity went off, and they had to bring in Jim Harbison a couple of days later because, again, there was kind of this lack of transparency of what is happening, why is our power not on? And so I think with the under one roof, I think we need to dig a little deeper, and that we need to be a little wiser with our choices of where we're putting tax dollars, particularly through the bonds fund and other avenues with that, because if we're not cleaning up the lack of transparency issues and we're still putting money into that same pot, I think that is definitely a concern for voters and people who live in MDHA housing.
So with Nashville, often people will look out, even from our vantage point here in downtown is booming and thriving, but some of the outlying areas feel underserved or that they're not getting enough, to your point, sidewalks and other infrastructure needs that those neighborhoods so greatly desire. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you would balance the needs of the surrounding suburb areas versus the core of downtown?
Well, one thing that I really want to do is get with the Minority Caucus. I think the Minority Caucus can be stronger, and I think that I can use some of my organizing, coalition building skills to really get in there and do some work. And I think particularly, all the districts that the Minority Caucus represent are those districts that could really use that infrastructure. And so one of my plans is to really build that Minority Caucus up and have us, working strategically to make sure we have some voting blocks set up to where we can say, hey, if we're going to vote on X, Y, and Z, can we at least get X, Y, and Z for our communities? And I think that hasn't been happening currently or in the past, and so I really want to see that happening, and I think that's a way that we can actually get some infrastructure needs met in some of those districts that has been neglected.
And it's been really interesting to see the diversity within Nashville itself, 525 square miles, and you have areas as diverse as Jolton and Trinity Lane and Antioch. Since you are running for a countywide position, have you been hearing different things from constituents depending on the geography of what is it that they're telling you, be it from Whites Creek or from Bellevue?
Absolutely. So I was actually just in Jolton this weekend, and I mean, literally the first thing out of one woman's mouth was, our roads are ridiculous out here. And next to her home, there was actually like a street that was like all gravel. And I think it's just hard to even navigate driving, in parts of Jolton. And of course, Bellevue isn't as connected. It's really hard to even just take the bus into the city from Bellevue. And so those are some of the things that I think, a lot of people talk about ridership and things like that, but it's not realistic for some of our areas in town. And I said in the easiest way that we can streamline that and make it better, I think is to, again, listen to community members, really put forth a collective, collaborative plan of what transportation should and could look like in our city. And expansion for our transportation system is definitely one of those. And we cannot take any cutbacks or any hits to our transportation system right now.
One mode of transportation that's been pretty contentious is the scooters.
Yes.
Can you tell us what your viewpoint is on the scooters?
Yeah, my viewpoints are this. I think that it is a mode of transportation for people. I think we do need to have some regulations on them. I'm going to be honest, I get really nervous sometimes when I'm driving. And I literally was going down 8th Avenue. I live in South Nashville. I was going down 8th Avenue, and there was a toddler and her dad on one. It was like shaking, and I was so nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, like praying, like please do not let this scooter tip over. But those are some of the things that I see. And of course, I mean, we can't allow that to happen. And so I think if we have just different zoning that we, particularly streets that, we allow scooters to go down, particularly downtown, and some that we, may not be able to do it. But I think that's a way that we can improve it. I don't think we have to just ban it altogether. That's just my opinion, because people do use them, especially to help get to work, especially in the downtown area. And I think that helps, free up traffic, and I think that's a good thing. So I think we just need, better regulations and maybe some a little better with zoning, and say, okay, during the, a big event, you can't ride the scooters, during this zone. So I think that simple adjustments like that, I think it could help with better experiences with drivers interacting with scooters.
One of the things that you listed in your questionnaire about a priority was bringing back trust and transparency when it came to metro government. And obviously you can't control who will be mayor. The current mayor could get reelected. There could be a new mayor. What does the next administration or the extension of this administration need to do to meet your expectations of trust and transparency?
Well, when I talked about trust and transparency, it wasn't mostly on the mayor. It was mostly about what the Metro Council can do and what I can do as a Metro Council member at large. And one of the proposals I have is if we're giving $5 million more, $5 million or more away in tax incentives, hey, we need to know, who are the investors in your investor group. That's invisible right now to the voters. We have no idea who is behind the parking plan, mostly. There's a few people, where you have to do open records requests and you drill down a little bit just to get the information, but the public usually doesn't know that. And when I say investor groups, I mean like who are the actual companies or members of these investor groups. Even when it comes to the soccer stadium, you heard the Ingram name thrown around, but was it only Ingram who was a part of Ingram's investor group? We don't know where those dollars are coming from. And so I think it's just important for transparency's sake to say, okay, if we're giving $5 million or more, this is who makes up this investor group, and this is who this money is going to, and here's what the plan is with this money. This is how it, will benefit you or in your community. And I think that's not happening right now. And I think if we are able to do that, it will help not only the city, but it will also help the council members, because I think sometimes that information is also invisible to some of our council members as well.
Some people have questioned the use of incentives, and others have said it's an important tool when we're trying to either lure a business or retain a business here in Nashville. Can you expand a little bit more on the use of incentives and how you view them?
Sure. So I think incentives have their purpose. I don't think we actually have to use them as much as we needed to in the past anymore. But when it comes to incentives, I think we need to have more incentive packages to actually help with some of the things we need, like traffic congestion. So my dad worked at Vanderbilt for 34 years, and as many of you know, Vanderbilt employees can ride the bus for free. And one thing that I always saw him do is when it snowed and when traffic was really crazy, he would literally ride the bus to work. And I said, we need more of that happening. And I think those are the type of incentives that we need to offer if they're helping, with the public education programs, if they're helping with some type of apprenticeships, if they're helping with, traffic, setting up some of those type of programs. I think that's what will benefit us the most with incentives, instead of just kind of giving these large amounts of money away and not really seeing our priorities worked in with the deal.
Thank you.
Related to that, we've talked about displacement of people, but there's also a growing trend of displacement of businesses, and especially small businesses. What role do you think you might have, if elected to the Metro Council, to help some of these issues that the businesses are facing?
Sure. Well, I think that's another area that we can use incentives for small businesses. And of course, small businesses have complained. I've heard a lot of complaints from small business owners about that. I also have heard from small business owners that communication is an issue from the city, where you have these pockets of different nonprofits, you have the Entrepreneurship Center and all these other classes that are offered, but they're kind of sometimes in their silos, and the communication isn't very well that's trickling down to the small business owners for them to be able to take advantage of them. And so I think that can be improved in a way. not only for small businesses, but for all of Nashville, because there's a lot of services that people just don't know about. I was in Sunnyside just a couple months ago, and I was telling them how my grandmother used Access Ride, and there were seniors over there who never heard of Access Ride before, and I was shocked. I didn't know that, people didn't know about some of the city services, and so I think just as well as business incentives for small businesses, I think just communication in general can be better, and we can do a lot better with public education and advertising of public services, and I think that will help benefit everyone in the city.
Can you tell us a little bit, we've talked about many subjects here today, but are there certain issues that you really want to embrace or that you prioritize with your values that you want to share with us today that we haven't discussed?
Sure. So a lot of people know me from working on a lot of things, criminal justice reform related. Of course, I've been the manager of the Nashville Community Bail Fund. I ran the Community Oversight Board. And I also have worked on voter rights restoration work, as well as driver's license reinstatement. And I think all these things are interconnected. And legal financial obligations in our city is a huge problem. And I think justice needs to be redefined in our city. And redefining justice looks like some of the contracts that we have are problematic with ICE, with Core Civic. And I think that if we really want to be community focused, we need to help restore our families and make them whole instead of separating them or playing any active role in separating them. And so I think my voice could be really important on the Metro Council to make sure some of those justice reforms that make complete sense and actually, an added benefit saves us tax dollars could really help. As well as, again, the youth violence. I think my expertise going into the juvenile and jails, I'm probably the only council member has been in every jail and juvenile that we have in Davidson County. I think it's really important for us to look at how that system is failing. And it's not working, and we need to really focus on prevention methods, particularly for our youth. I think we had the highest number of 13-year-olds ever arrested in the city last year, and so I think we really need to focus on prevention. And I visited with several alternative schools because I've had to transition some of my girls who have been sent to alternative school back to their zone schools, and during that process, I really learned a lot about how they are just, packed. They are over capacity. They don't have wraparound services. They don't have social emotional learning, and they don't have extracurricular activities at the schools you would think you would want at-risk youth in extracurricular activities. And I remember one of my girls when she was at her public high school before having to be sent to alternative school, she was in the band, she was in basketball. And when she went to this school, that's actually when she started picking up more serious charges. And they all kind of get together, and obviously they have some, interpersonal and family and environmental issues that are going on. Instead of having that additional help that they need, they are kind of concentrating all these behavioral, mental health, children together. And that's where I am seeing most of the kids catch more serious charges when they're pushed out of their regular public school. So I think we can do a little bit better with prevention in our schools, and also just making the public aware of how they can participate in schools. I go to IEP meetings for some of my girls, and they need a lot of support, particularly when they are in, tough environments like MDHA housing in Casey. Of course, you all know I grew up in East Nashville, so I still do a lot of work in Casey homes, and many of my girls who have been in Casey have been put out of schools multiple times. And so, yeah, I think it's a multi-level approach, and I think you need someone on council who can really speak to, that research, that data, and that hands-on experience to really make that happen. So I think that's one thing that I didn't talk about that I'm really, really passionate about, and I think as a city we can really improve if we have people who have that direct impacted experiences to help, draft legislation and figure out which way can we, work this budget to really see an improvement there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And as we're at the end of our interview, we do want to give you a chance to speak to our viewers directly, to tell them why they should vote for you and how they might contact you or find more information about you.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, my name is Gicola Lane. I'm running for Metro Council at Large. I would appreciate your vote. You can start voting July 12th. It's actually the day after my 30th birthday, so if you want to give me a 30th birthday gift, you can hit Gicola Lane on the ballot box. I am running on a transparency platform. I am running on an equity platform. I am running on a redefining justice and public safety platform. And those are all things I've heard all across Nashville that we need. I would appreciate your support. You can find me online at gicolalane.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Gicola Lane. Feel free to reach out to me, ask any questions that you like. I'm also open for coffees and water. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we want to thank our viewers. You can watch and replay videos on Tennessean.com. Today, July 2nd, is the final day to register to vote for the August 1st election. As Ms. Lane said, July 12th is the start of early voting, and your last chance to vote is August 1st. Your vote is your voice.